I'm Matthew Woods, host of Leading Out of the Woods, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you are listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hey, welcome back. Steve here, and today I'm talking with Matt J. Navo. He is the Executive Director for the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence, or CCEE. He is a former school system superintendent, district-level administrator, principal, and so many other educational positions, as well as a special education teacher. Today we are focused on what CCEE is and two specific programs the organization implements: the Intensive Assistance Model and the Community Engagement Initiative. Oh, you're going to love this talk. So much to learn. Thanks for listening. And it'd be so cool before you go. Could you go to my website, stephenmiletto.com/reviews, and leave a review? It's real simple right there. You know, just go in there, click on it, say a few nice words, and how about 5 stars? What do you think, huh? That'd be so cool. Thanks for listening. Thanks for sharing. Enjoy the show.
It's the Education Podcast, your favorite show, with lots of groovy guests and they share what they know. So crank it up to 10 and let your neighbors know that here's another show with Dr. Steve Miletto. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. With Dr. Steve Miletto.
Matt J. Navo serves as the Executive Director for the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence, CCEE. His knowledge and expertise in systems improvement comes from over 3 decades of experience as a K-12 educator and leader. Matt served as the superintendent of Sanger Unified School District. Before assuming the role of superintendent, he was a special education teacher, secondary instructor, counselor, resource teacher, junior high learning director, high school assistant principal, elementary and alternative education principal, director of special education, and area administrator. Man, you wore a lot of hats for different years. Prior to his current role, he served as the director of systems transformation with the Special Education Policy and Practice Division, or SEPPD, at West Ed. Matt's expertise lies in aligning systems, building capacity for continuous improvement, fostering collaborative cultures and collective efficacy among teams, and establishing coherent and efficient models for districts and schools. He is the author of Collective Efficacy in a PLC at Work 2021 and Demystifying MTSS, a school and district framework for meeting students' academic and social emotional needs. Matt received his bachelor's degree in education and his master's degree in special education from California State University, Fresno. Our focus today is 2 initiatives. One's called Intensive Assistance Model, and the other one is the Community Engagement Initiative. Matt, welcome, and thanks for joining me, and say hi to everyone.
Oh, good morning, Stephen. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm glad to have you here, and this is cool. Now, you know, one of the cool things about podcasts, by the way, is we're almost on the other side of the universe from each other. You're in California and I'm in Georgia, and it's so cool that we can just have, because the connection is pretty good. I'm excited about this. So good stuff.
It's amazing what we can do.
It is
nowadays, and so it's just a joy to be able to connect with you and connect with your listeners on what we're doing here in California.
Well, glad to have you. And before we get into our talk today, let's talk about you. You recently were a superintendent of a school system. What was something that you learned in that role that stays with you today?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, I served in Sanger Unified for 19 years and was had some great leadership there and transitioned into superintendent. One of the things that stands out to me as I transitioned from those various roles that you described into the role of superintendent is how long school transformation takes and how important the professional and personal relationships are in moving that needle for schools and school personnel. It is complex, and I think that in this day and age, it seems like many of those who are crafting policy around education have little patience for the amount of time it takes to actually transform a school.
That's so powerful, because it really is. Thanks for sharing that, because it is something that it takes time, and it's crazy.
It does. I mean, I had an opportunity with National Center for Intensive Intervention under WestEd to see and work with 29 states. And it's amazing that in all of those states, including ours in California, you deal with a myriad of complex relationships and connections with, regional offices who have relationships, personal and professional, with their districts. And all of those schools seem to fall into, one of four quadrants in terms of their willingness and ability to actually improve. And each one of those quadrants requires a certain amount of time and a different approach. And if you haven't lived it, it's difficult to talk about it. In Sanger, we were considered one of the national recognized school turnaround and district turnaround in the country. And we were written and studied by Stanford researchers Jane Talbert and Jane David and Joan Talbert. And they were trying to study whether or not what we did in Sanger could be replicated across other schools. And the answer for that was yes. And the answer to that was no. So the complexity around how schools change is really something that stayed with me as a superintendent and has brought with me to these other experiences.
That's awesome, because you're so right. Just the other day I was talking with somebody about, we're working with children and no matter what their ages, there's different, everything from baggage to experiences to whatever their life, whatever their world is. And they're not widgets, as you're working with them and stuff like that. We have things that we can do to our practice and stuff like that can improve, but we're also got to figure out that population that's coming to us. And there's some unique challenges there.
We have a saying here in California: if you've seen one county office, you've seen one county office. I think the same is the same for most schools. If you've seen one school, you've seen one school. They're not all the same, and it requires a degree of strategy for those who are trying to help and support them.
So much so. Well, all right. So let's talk about you as a teacher. If you were able to go back in time to the day before you first started teaching, what is some advice you would give you about working with your students? If that makes sense, right before.
Oh my gosh, that's a great question. Yeah, so I came from the day back in 1992. I started teaching. I actually, at that particular time in California, you could walk into a classroom with nothing more than 124 units in a BA. I actually started with an internship. I think I was taking home $900 a month for being a teacher at that particular time, because the agreement I had with Fresno State at that time, the internship, my salary was helping to pay for that. It was a great opportunity. I mean, I would have not probably entered the profession had it not been that easy to do so. And I learned a lot on the job that had I had the opportunity and taken advantage of the opportunity to actually expand my knowledge base around teaching and learning, it could have served me well. But I had great master teachers and I had great support. But I'll tell you, there's something that stood out to me a great deal when I got into that profession as I look back. And it was what I missed as a young teacher going into that was how important creating a sense of belonging for kids is when it comes to helping them really move out of the fixed mindsets that they come to school with. I was so focused on trying to do my lessons plans, trying to make sure I was achieving the state test benchmarks, and my assessments were well written, and I was on pace with my scope and sequence, and just all the things that a new teacher does. I thought I was creating enough space to create a sense of belonging, but as I've learned more about how important it is for students to sense a degree of warmth from a teacher, as well as a degree of understanding that they understand their circumstances. I would have been a much better teacher. It would have taken me less time to do the things that I learned the hard way.
Thanks for sharing that. It's so powerful, because I understand what you're talking about, because I'm back in the same time frame. Actually, I'm a little earlier. I was 87 my first year, and and it's just funny because I learned something rather quickly. Because at first I was all about wanting to I was a history teacher, and I say history because I specifically was focused on history, U.S. and world, and I didn't want to be a social studies teacher. And not that there's anything wrong with that, by the way, whoever's listening. But the point is that in the beginning, I wanted to make history come alive, be fun, get them excited. And one of the things I learned right away is that there's more to teaching than the content. And it's, working with the kids and trying to help them, navigate whatever is their turn to navigate along with your content and to help move them forward. So, but it's cool stuff what you're talking about. I just think about it.
That's so important, Stephen. I mean, that's the first thing I learned, right? And when I look back is, boy, I was focused on the outcomes because of the pressures that teachers feel around student achievement. But I'll tell you what, the second thing I learned was if kids aren't learning, it's not their fault. It's mine as a teacher. And I had a great leader who said, hey, just remember, Matt, the parents don't keep the good ones at home. They're sending the best they have to us every day.
I love that.
So blaming their circumstances and situations that outside of your control isn't going to help you. And I remember that stuck with me, right? It stuck with me because it's so easy for us to get caught up in the myriad of things that prevent students from coming with and presenting them their best selves, poverty, crime, and neglect. But I had to remember that parents weren't keeping their good ones at home. They're sending the best they have every day, and it's my job to make sure that they have a sense of belonging and they're learning. And if I'm not achieving those two things, it's not their fault. So that was hard because it was so quick back in the day, Stephen. You probably remember. We taught it; they just didn't learn it.
Right. And
that was sometimes the mantra. That mantra didn't serve me well as a young teacher.
Yeah, I experienced that on my own as well as saw when I became a teacher. But yeah, that was something that from the very beginning that was not going to be my planet. And but because you really hate that when because I was somebody who benefited from a teacher realizing that I wasn't getting something, that I wasn't really understanding, but I was a good kid and moving, knew how to play the game right so that I wouldn't get the attention of the teacher. And, and I had this whole thing planned out. I had this where I would sit in a certain area in the room, tell my friends, don't talk to me when the teacher's talking. And I'd sit there and look at the teacher and look like it. I'm at least taking notes. And then,
That's right.
She figured out that there was an area that I was struggling in, and she wouldn't play that game. So it was nice because it helped.
That's right.
Kind of smack me into reality there. She didn't actually smack me. That's not my point.
We all need a little bit of help once in a while.
Yes, exactly. Good stuff. All right. So let's talk about your current role. You're the executive director for the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence, CCEE. Tell us about the collaborative. What's its purpose and what's its why?
Sure. This is really a great, I love the way you set this up because, the CCEE, as we call it, has not been without conflict since it was created in 2013-14 by then Governor Brown and the state legislature and the state board with the idea that we would partner as with state lead agencies to help deliver on California's promise of providing a quality, equitable education for every student. So as the CCEE, we are charged by statute to advise and assist local LEAs, and we call those local educational agencies, and that encompasses all schools and all what we would call regional county offices in accomplishing their LCAP goals. And we exist really to make local control a reality by working alongside and versus coming in and telling schools how to do work and telling county offices how to do work. Our primary function was to be different than the current state departments because the current state departments function a certain way by necessity because of the federal government requirements for many educational initiatives. The state departments are created to really monitor and ensure compliance with federal policy. There was no one in the state of California that was helping with the innovation side of the work, really having a vision to help transform public education so every student is inspired and prepared to thrive. There was no one that was doing that work. And so our state leaders went to Ontario and observed the secretariat there and came back with an idea that we needed to do something different. If we were going to help improve outcomes, we needed an agency that could be flexible and nimble, adaptive, innovative, transformative, and come in with a different lens when it comes to the application of helping county offices, who are primary customers, is the county offices, to partner with them to support the schools and teachers and students who we are trying to impact.
That's awesome. And so, one of the things that I got to make sure I ask you before we get, because we're going to talk about some what you got going on initiatives wise. Before we do that, so what do you do as the director? What's your, tell us a little bit about what your day is like, or what you like doing.
That's a great question too. So being the director, we've had 3 directors. I'm the third of the CCEE. We've had a former superintendent of Long Beach Unified, Carl Cohn, who a lot of educators know. He's has a great reputation, well renowned across the country. Then we had Tom Armelino, who was a former county office superintendent out at Shasta, who was just incredible around teaching and learning. And he came in, and each of those directors had served for about 3 years. I had the privilege of serving on the board as the representative for the CCE. The CCE has 5 board members. It has basically a representative for teachers, a representative. It has the state superintendent on the board. It has a county office representative. It also has a public superintendent representative. And I had actually served on the CCE board twice. When I was on the state board, I was assigned as the liaison to the CCEE again. And Sue Burr, who was assigned, she was the vice chair of the State Board of Education, was the chair since the inception of the CCE. Much of what I do was different than what I thought I would do. So I find ways, my job, as I would sum it up, is to find ways to transform schools by building capacity within the statewide system of support through the partnerships with our local county offices that will enhance professional learning, technical assistance, strategic thinking, connecting across the state, and enhancing innovation. So I serve as an executive director who is trying to cultivate a culture within the statewide system of support that allows people to build the capacity through the innovative means to assist schools, trying to shift our lens from the compliance related issues that we have to do and foster a culture of collaboration to actually get the work done. It sounds easy, but when you're talking about coordinating across one of the most complex states in the country, we have 58 county offices that cover 58 different regions that serve over 2,000 LEAs. LEAs like LA Unified, who have over 650,000 students, to some of our districts up north that have 10 students. And not all of those districts are built to do the same kinds of work that the state designates needs to be done. And they have to find different ways to deliver on some of the initiatives. And it's our job to really help find those ways, to bridge the gap between the ideas and implementation so that we're ultimately serving students in a flexible means, but a tightly adhered to goal.
That's awesome. That's, and never in a million years would I think that's easy. Talking about challenges, just from the differences between one end of the state to the very other end of the state and everything in between. Wow. I can only imagine what type of, on top of that, I mean, one of the words you use is you're seeking collaboration. And, that's that would be an interesting challenge just alone, just with places that are a little closer to each other as opposed to the entire state. So cool.
Yes, absolutely.
Very nice. All right. So we're going to talk about a couple of the different programs that you have. There's quite a few that you use to do what you do, and one of them we're going to talk about is this. I mean, let's take a little dive into how this unique statewide agency that you oversee in California is collaborating with school leaders to transform education. I mean, let's talk about the intensive assistance model. What is that, and what do you do?
Sure. The intensive assistance. So we have two ways work comes to us at the California Collaborative. One way is through legislation. So our legislative agencies, the Assembly and the Senate, Governor, the State Board will collaborate with the Department of Finance, and they'll determine and prioritize a particular initiative through legislation, and they might tag the CCEE as the responsible party for delivering that, or one of several partners to deliver that. We also have what we were created to do, which is our statutory responsibility, which is to advise and assist LEAs in accomplishing their LCAP goals. This initiative, the intensive assistance model, falls under both of those. So one, we have a legislative responsibility to provide direct technical assistance to districts who are not achieving the results they need. The county offices will make a referral to us to say, hey, we need more help. The CCEE then does an assessment of whether or not how best to support. And then we provide direct technical assistance to those districts. And that is, if you were thinking on a scale of, tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, tier 1 being the least amount of support to tier 3, the intensive, the districts that we're serving right now, we would describe as being between 2 and 3. And tier 3, as it's represented currently, would be a referral to the State Department of Ed for oversight of that district. So we're a kind of a last ditch opportunity to really support districts before we run out of opportunities for how we can improve. And the intensive assistance model was created in a really, really interesting story, but it's much longer than you probably have time for here. But basically what the intensive assistance model does is, when I served at the both in my previous districts and in the National Center, we had several states who were talking about some really unique work that they were doing to help transform schools. We met with one of those states. We sat down with them and we tried to find out more about what they were doing as part of our work. And in this state, they connected us to a school, and I'll never forget it. It was a teacher by the name of Darla Sampley. She was a 5th and 6th grade social studies teacher at Spradling Elementary. And we met with her. And I asked her, tell me about this work that you're doing, this new innovative approach to transforming schools. You're a teacher, how's it affecting you? She goes on to describe this guiding coalition that she's working in. And guiding coalition, Stephen, is language that we used in my former district. It was predicated on the idea that you in order to improve teaching and learning, you have to have a foundation of rich professional collaboration amongst teachers. You have to create time, intentionally create time, where teachers can come together and answer 4 specific questions around student learning. The first one being, what do we want students to know and be able to do? They have to be able to have time. And what we were finding in our former place was many districts have prep time carved into the day for teachers to prepare for the upcoming day. And they need that lesson planning, materials, articulation with others. But they didn't have carved out was this specific time to focus on just student learning. And in our former experience, we had a guiding coalition. This was like the group of teachers that were helping to navigate how teachers collaborate and what they collaborate about. How do they prioritize standards? How do they deconstruct those standards in a way that helps them achieve goals in a meaningful way? How do they craft together common formative assessments? How do they set up their scope and sequence so that the students that the essential standards that students need to know. They can acquire that learning so that they're prepared for the next grade. Well, Darla describes this, and I asked her, well, that sounds really familiar. Can you tell me what they do? And she says, our job as a guiding coalition, and granted, this is in a school that had very little collaboration. And I'm paraphrasing here, is to ensure that equitable teaching practices are used in every classroom we have. And so I remember asking her, well, this is amazing. Can you tell me who's leading this work? And she said, well, we are. And I said, well, I understand that. But which administrator is actually leading this work? So that I could speak to them a little bit more about how they're crafting this conversation. She said, there is no administrator. It's us as teachers. And that dawned on me that we're doing something innovative that we had experienced in my former district that actually promoted school transformation. So the intensive assistance model is that we are building in right now, we have a pilot group of schools, 5 districts and 8 schools that are focused on building the collaborative structures through intensive coaching and support. And so each of these schools that had signed up and said, we want to do this work, we want to learn how to collaborate, we want our teachers to be able to focus on teaching and learning, have signed assurances that they would do certain things to make sure that they prioritize for these teachers at these schools collaborative conversations around student learning. These schools are getting a coach for math, ELA, ELD, leadership, and professional learning communities. They're getting over 130 days of coaching over the next 3 years, boots on the ground, elbow to elbow with professionals, experts in those fields to help craft for them.
In these schools is that these teachers are not only going to achieve higher results in student performance, but they have cultivated a culture that allows them to deconstruct the challenges in their school when it comes to mental health, behavioral health, or instructional efficacy. They are articulating to us that this is the model, this is what we needed. The professional learning that we've engaged, this pray and spray kind of professional learning where we go and we sit for a full day, we miss our kids, we then have to leave that professional learning and figure out how to implement. That's not the ticket for us. The ticket is elbow to elbow coaching. And this is an intensive depth of investment for us as a state, because what our goal is to create these schools will become national model schools for collaboration, and these teachers will become national leaders for collaboration, and we will use these schools and these teachers and their knowledge to help share that with other schools. So you're building out a pyramid of learning and peer-to-peer learning that begins to take over and helps transform schools. We have learned that schools transform not because somebody comes in and says, this is how you do the work. Schools transform because teachers encourage one another and say, this is how I did the work.
I like that a lot. That's awesome, because that's so right on the money with the power of the teachers is they encourage each other and focus on what matters, and that's that's powerful. Good stuff. All right. So one of the things that another program that I want to get you to talk about is the Community Engagement Initiative. But before you do that, can you talk about a little bit about what it looks like, the intensive assistant model? I mean, what does that look like when you're working with them or with the teams or however it's going? I mean, what would someone notice?
So they would notice immediately when they come in to a school in this model, they would notice that the principal, first and foremost, is at the table during the professional learning with teachers. So their leadership team sits and deconstructs standards. Their principals and leadership sit with those teams and grapple with as much about learning as the teachers do. That's a difference than what you would see in other schools. Oftentimes what you will see in other school sites or people who are not oriented in this way, school systems that aren't oriented in this way, is the teachers are doing learning, but the principal's out on the peripheral. They're watching, or they're observing, or they're monitoring. They're not in the work. These principals and leaders are in the work. You would hear language around a guiding coalition, not a leadership team. A guiding coalition would be a group of teachers focused on improvement of learning, not a leadership team that's focused on managing learning. So you would see those differences. You would see teachers sitting together and not talking about all what the next week's field trip looks like. You'd be hearing teachers talking and bringing data to a conversation that says, here's what we said our students needed to be able to learn and do. Here are the results from our common assessments. Now, what are we going to do for those that already learned it? And what are we going to do for those that didn't learn it? They would have those two questions embedded in. So you would see a different orientation around how they collaborate. And most importantly, you would see collective efficacy at a level that you would not see. I'll give you an example. In schools that are not in the intensive assistance model, in schools that are working in a traditional sense, you see a belabored and tired educator. In schools in the intensive assistance model, you see a belabored and tired educator who has hope, excitement, and anticipation that they're actually going to move this needle. And you see a level of vulnerability and a willingness to say, we thought we were doing this work well. We aren't, and we weren't. And now we're starting to. It's a different way of talking about the work that when leaders come into these schools, they'd be amazed and they would leave there saying, how do I get my teachers to talk this way? How do I get my teachers to get excited about teaching and learning in this way? And our first answer to them is, you got to get it off the peripheral, off the edge of the inside, and you got to get in the work. You got to get in the alleys. There's a picture I heard came out of LA Times once. It was a note for leaders, and it said the only way you're going to improve your organization is to get off the edge of the inside. And what that means is, like, when most people are flying into a Las Vegas or a San Francisco in the evening, if or driving in for that matter, most of us have seen the lights and the beauty and the excitement, and you get the energy and the euphoria of coming in. That's called being on the edge of the inside. And then you get in and you see the alleys, and you see some poverty, and you see the dirt, and you realize there's a lot more here. There's a lot to do here. It's not as pretty as it looked. Well, they were saying to leaders, you got to get off the edge of the inside. You got to get in the nooks and crannies with teachers. You got to start learning to teach again. And that's what the difference you would see in these schools.
That's awesome. That's powerful. It's you give me goosebumps, man.
It gets me excited too, because there's an empowerment with these teachers, with these educators that are experiencing that. Here's the kicker though, Steve. How do states do this work is really challenging. How do states lead this work is really challenging. Especially with the intensive coaching that's required.
I can imagine. One of the things that I would think is a challenge that you have to contend with is the teacher, the team member, just waiting to be, kind of like the thought that, yeah, you want me to participate, and then you're going to, push me aside and then tell me how to do it right. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but the thought that they're just waiting for you to like pull the branch out from underneath and the plug on the sink or whatever, and say, now we're really going to step in and tell you that was just getting you to, just kind of messing with you a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, how many times this too shall pass, right? I mean, how many times we were incredibly dysfunctional in my former district prior to our ongoing transformation. I'll tell you what, there wasn't a federal program monitoring. There wasn't a compliance document. There wasn't a state oversight that our teachers couldn't figure out how to make anything they wanted work. Because they were so used to people coming in and telling them, this is how oh yeah, we can do that. Yeah, we'll do that. We can produce that plan. We can rewrite that plan for you. We can articulate the objectives. The bottom line was they got so used to just having people come in and saying and hammering them about what they're not doing that they got incredibly skilled at creating a hallucination or an illusion, and those people would leave. Okay, great, you're on the right track, and nothing really was changing as a result of any of that.
Right. Oh my gosh. Well, cool stuff. This is exciting what you're talking about. This is I love it. So I want to shift gears on you, and I want to ask you about another program, which is called the Community Engagement Initiative. I mean, tell us what this is all about.
So the Community Engagement Initiative was created by the legislature in 2018. It had the following purposes. It really was about building capacity in communities and schools to have difficult conversations with each other that would build trust and focus on improving outcomes for pupils. I mean, that was the number one goal. The second was identifying effective models for community engagement. So how did districts come into space with their communities when they don't all speak the same language, when they don't understand the complexity of school funding? How do they create metrics to help people in the community evaluate whether or not things are working? And the second was to develop these peer-to-peer connections and partnerships between districts and schools and counties to be able to do this work. And the last one was just how do we scale it up? I mean, those four really was how do you scale these kinds of conversations up? And San Bernardino County was the leader of CEI. We call it CEI 1.0. And then last year, the legislature passed $100 million for community engagement 2.0. And San Diego County is now leading that work along with some partner agencies. Our Family and Schools and CABE have always been partners in this work. And we work to facilitate that conversation and ensure that the deliverables are being met, that the legislature articulated as the aspirational goals for this work. So, so many school districts have ideas. They have complex, this, Stephen, the complexity of the funding of a school district it's hard for people even in the school district to understand the myriad of ways funding comes, how it can be spent, how you try to predict the budget. It's harder for a single mother who has 3 kids, who doesn't speak the language well, but wants to be involved to understand that. So this initiative is about how do we bridge that gap for our community so they can be more involved.
That's awesome. I love it. And you're so right. Trying to understand it as a professional who's in the world going, okay, now let me see. I can't combine this money with that money, and I got to take care of this, and I got to take care of that. I got to come up with some other funds. What other funds do I have? Yeah,
that's right. That's right.
It's interesting. So, what a great focus this program has. So what's it look like? Give me an example of someone walking in there and they're going to experience what this school's doing differently if they're part of this program. What's it look like? Well,
if they walked into a facilitated group that of our community engagement districts, they would see an intense facilitation being done by parents and educators together. So often the first orientation is oftentimes when you have a community conversation, you often see the community being talked at by the school leaders or teachers who are trying to deliver some sense of understanding around what the goal is or the initiative is in the district. In this particular case, you would see legwork and work being done in the background that has created a situation where parents are as much a part of that leadership and as much a part of leading that discussion and helping parents get through it as it would be school educators and leaders. So you would see that orientation quite significantly different. You would see a difference in the way that schools and districts creating access for their communities. So when you come into a traditional sense, you would have a community that gets pulled together with a school district because they're having a open house, back to school night. And they would call those community engagement initiatives. Those are things that we do to engage the community in our work. In the CEI, we're trying to move beyond that. Those are what we would call passive engagement. When a community is invited to be part of an experience and they are sitting and getting and receiving some information, that's passive. We're trying to move beyond that in the community engagement initiative. You would see much more active engagement, where every time that a community comes together in these districts, they're actively participating in some way, whether the school is trying to acquire information from them so that they can have a better sense as to how to support them, or whether the community is as much a part of the planning and the development and the delivery of the coordinated efforts as they are. And that's what we're trying to do. So you would see a difference, distinct difference between the passive engagement of those who are not in CEI and those districts and communities who are in CEI, a much more active way of engaging with one another. And you would not experience a community partnership with a school or district that doesn't have some form of active participation from parents. You would very rarely see them come and sit and get, like you would a traditional back to school night, Stephen. You'd have parents come and they come and they meet their teachers, and the teachers talk to them. And what's the first thing they usually talk to them about? The rules.
Right. Nice welcoming topic. Yes.
Yeah, it's the rules. Here's the rules to my class. Here's what we do. We're trying to move beyond that. Parents don't need to come and, yes, they can read that if they have a question about that. But let's talk about how you as a teacher are going to support their students when they don't learn, and how parents can be involved. And let's get some parents up there who are in the CEI can talk a little bit about how parents who want to access the system can better access the system. That's what we want to do. So that's what CEI is trying to do. That was the vision of the legislature and the governor, and that's what we're trying to deliver.
That's awesome. I love it. Two very powerful, and they're just part of a huge iceberg you've got here of programs that you do. So how does it, a school or a school system or community? I mean, how are you do they engage you? Do they engage you, or is some other method that says you're now going to work with this program, this school over here? I mean, how does that happen?
Yeah, we don't turn anybody away. So our team, I have a fantastic team at CCEE. We have over 30 people across the state who are experts in the field working with schools. And usually they come through the county offices. So the county offices will identify, hey, we have a school that's in need of unique supports and services. But we also have schools that come to us directly and say, how do I get involved in CEI? How can I be a part of that? We usually launch through our listserv a number of ways, and we give people information so that they can be involved. The easiest thing is to go to our website at cce-ca.org, and they can look at each of our centers within the CCEE. They can find out who the staff, who the team is, which initiatives they lead. Stephen Sterling Mitchell, David Toston are one of the leaders for CEI, and they can easily access them and say, can I learn more about what you're doing, especially if there's states listening to this podcast or state leaders and they're wanting to know more about, okay, how did California organize this? That's where they would go, and we have tons of information we can share.
Very cool. So if, as we're wrapping up here, one of the things that, and I know you said how they could find out more information about that, but how about if they want to reach out to you or to know specifically how your group works?
We're open. Again, they can get to us through the website. There's a listserv. They can also get to me at mnavo@cce-ca.org. So my email's there. That I get a lot of emails from people across the state saying, I heard about this. Can you direct me? Sometimes we don't even oversee the initiative. Sometimes we're trying to plug them into the statewide system of support, particularly around students with disabilities. As you know, Stephen, there are many, many districts, and there's a teacher shortage around serving students with disabilities. There are LEAs that are struggling to serve students with disabilities. There are states that are trying to figure out how to meet the needs of students with disabilities. California has a myriad of supports for districts to help meet the needs of students with disabilities, and oftentimes they don't have a way to get there, so they come to us. We plug them and partner them in. That's where our connector, our ability to be a connector, comes in handy. So they can get a hold of me, and they can get a hold of me through the website, cce-ca.org, or me at mnavo@cce-ca.org.
Awesome. And I'll have that information in the show notes, so it makes it easy for them to reach out to you. So good stuff. So, so Matt, before we go, I got last two questions that are just some questions that I'd like to ask my guests. And the first one goes like this. When so much is happening and needing to be done and life is extremely demanding, what stops you from quitting or giving up?
That's such a great question, Stephen. I really appreciate the thoughtfulness of your questions to get to the core of who the people are that are on these calls with you, these podcasts with you. And for me, I'm reminded often of my mother. And I was not a kid who did well in school. I struggled early on, and I was in a school that was challenged with a number of poverty-stricken issues, and I was running with some kids that weren't, let's just say we fed off of our bad behavior at times. And I struggled to read. And I remember my mother taking hours to try and get me to read. And she would just pull me to the table and help me with sight words. And at that particular time, Stephen, you probably remember this, but we would organize our reading groups by unique names teachers did. They had them in groups, and if you were the Blue Jays, you got to the table and you knew the Blue Jays were reading at above grade level, just by nature of the name.
Right.
And, I was in the Blackbirds. We were not reading at grade level. And so I remember how that felt. And it wasn't that teachers and educators crafted a system to intentionally create a stigma or a situation for students. That was the best we knew how to do at that particular time. And my mom didn't give up. I had a teacher that didn't give up. And so I struggle when I grapple with, well, this is not going to work. We're never going to fix a system. We're never going to fix the complexity of the state. The legislature's never going to stop passing bills. We had over 600 education bills in our state this year. We're never going to do this, never going to do that. And in spite of all of that, when it gets down to the boots on the ground, none of that matters. All that matters is that the educators that are in front of kids don't give up on them. And if I can do something that can help foster and create space that gives them a little bit more, then it's worth it.
Love it. That is so awesome. That's give me chills again, man. This is good. I love this.
I appreciate that.
Last question I got for you, Matt. It goes like this. Do you have a teacher in your past who made a difference in your life? If so, who was it? And what would you say if given the chance to say thank you?
Boy, a teacher that comes to mind is Miss Shirley Cox. She was my 5th grade teacher at Sierra Vista Elementary in Clovis. And I didn't get an opportunity to thank her. But I remember this. The only thing I was really good at that particular age was sports. Like a lot of young kids, Stephen, that are struggling to read, you gravitate to some form of athletic. It creates a sense of belonging for you. And at that particular time, I did. My mother was thank God she married I had a wonderful stepfather, but early on we were on our own. And I remember having a football coach and coaches. I was fairly good, and so I was out there. Shirley Cox, I'll never forget it. She said to me, "You're not going to practice until you learn to read." And I remember my coaches coming in and going, "Hey, he needs to be out." I was, playing quarterback at the time. "He needs to be out there. When is this going to be done?" She said, "When he learns to read."
Nice.
And oh God, it was painful. I resented that so much. But you know what? She probably saved me. So I would thank her.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. Matt, thank you so much for talking with me today. What an awesome focus the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence, CCEE, has, and these cool models that you shared with me, the intensive assistant model and the community engagement initiative are difference makers. I love it. Thank you so much. Wishing you the best in all you do.
You're welcome. Thank you, Stephen, for having me. I appreciate you, and thank you for giving us some space on your podcast.
Hey, you have been listening to Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12, a podcast to help you help kids achieve their dreams. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is a member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is a member of the podcast network based in Canada called Voice Ed Radio. Voice Ed Radio, your voice is right here. The opinions expressed on Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 are those of the guests and host. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is intended to share ideas, advice, and suggestions. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is produced for educational purposes. Hey, thanks for listening. It would be awesome if you visited my website at stephenmiletto.com and connected with me, left a review, and listened to more episodes. And by the way, you could also share it with your friends, with your family, and your colleagues. Thanks so much. You're awesome.